On July 9, 1961, the sky over Moscow was noisy. In the midst of the air parade, in the ranks with dozens of eminent aircraft, unfamiliar machines flashed by, resembling either small bombers or large fighters, and the audience tried for a long time to find out details about today's hero. Hello aviators, Sky here, and today we have Tupolev's interceptor. Meet the Tu-128. The 1950s were an extremely dangerous time for the USSR. Nuclear parity had not yet been formed, missiles capable of striking the other side of the planet were just being born, and the main carriers of nuclear weapons were strategic bombers, of which there was a huge number, mainly in the United States. The question how to defend against them was extremely relevant for the Soviet Union. The first answer to this question was a breakthrough in the creation of air defense missile systems capable of attacking almost any aircraft. But the umbrella they created was small and covered only certain zones. It could turn out that while the bombers couldn't attack those zones, in the rest of the country they would do whatever they wanted. It was simply impossible to protect the entire territory of the USSR this way, especially its distant and hard-to-reach regions. This umbrella was supposed to be widened by fighter interceptors. The newest MiGs, Yaks and Sukhois could protect large areas. But as practice showed, even this was not enough. The flight range was short, and the insufficient development of onboard equipment made them dependent on ground-based detection and guidance systems, which limited autonomy. Something else was needed, larger, more long-range, and autonomous. The first to create such an interceptor was the Tupolev Design Bureau. The La-250 was not a bad option, promising to solve the range problem. Promising. Alas, the plane turned out to be very problematic and required serious improvements, which stretched out its birth for many years. Seeing all this, the military decided to turn to a team that, although not engaged in fighter jets, was the best at long-range vehicles, the Tupolev Design Bureau. At that time, the Tupolev team was busy creating a new supersonic bomber, which was supposed to replace the Tu-128. Aircraft 98 was a breakthrough for its time, and this was also a problem. Advanced solutions came with a lot of issues, and by the time the work on the plane was completed, the military ordered its brother, the Tu-122. Project 98 was already forgotten, but with the advent of an idea of a heavy interceptor, its development turned out to be very useful. The Project 128 appeared within the walls of the Design Bureau, and in 1958 it was officially launched as part of the creation of a new air defense complex. At the same time, the La-250 project was closed. The demands of the military were serious. The project, which they at the beginning called the Tu-128, involved the creation of a long-range supersonic interceptor, an updated engine, new onboard equipment, and missiles. The aircraft had to be able to fly up to 3.5 hours at subsonic, accelerate to Mach 1.7 at supersonic, and also attack targets at altitudes up to 21 kilometers. All this beauty was expected by 1960. The designer's idea was to take an existing aircraft 98 and modify it into an interceptor. Range and autonomy were in fact already there, it was only necessary to play with the design and filling. Meanwhile, the mass and sluggishness of the bomber were not initially a problem. Yes, you can't make a fighter out of it, it won't master air combat, especially dogfights. But this was not required, its targets were heavy strategic bombers and reconnaissance aircraft. The task was high-speed interception. The plane was rather a launch platform and a guidance complex, while missiles were supposed to be in contact with the enemy. Despite the apparent simplicity, there was a lot of work. Many organizations and research centers worked on each aspect. The first Tu-128 was assembled by the summer of 1960. After a series of ground tests, on March 18, 1961, the prototype made its first flight. Curiously, the assembly of the first production batch of 4 machines was already underway at that time, before the start of full-fledged tests. Risky, but a lot of time could be saved. The public demonstration did not take long either, and the plane showed up at the parade in Moscow's Tushino in the summer of 1961. The people were impressed. Newspapers published articles, and NATO issued to the plane a name: Fiddler. Few people knew at that time there were two of these brand new interceptors, but this deficit did not last long. Already in 1962, the first series was ready, and the aviators had 5 aircraft. Soon, the Tu-128 began to flex its muscles, conducting test firing of its latest missiles at remote-controlled target aircraft. At this stage, not only weapons were actively tested, but also guidance systems and communication with ground air defense forces. The plane showed itself perfectly, both in conjunction and autonomously. In 1963, the military finally gave official indexes to all elements of the complex, and the aircraft received the name Tu-128, by which everyone knows it now. In 1965, the interceptor was put into service. The appearance of the Tu-128 was very much influenced by the Tupolev designs and Project 98. It looks like a bomber. Next to bombers, it looks modest, although for an interceptor, it is of course a big guy. 17.5 meters wingspan, 30 meters in length, 7.1 meters high. Maximum takeoff weight of 43.7 tons. The large swept wing has fairly developed high-lift devices, ailerons, flaps, and spoilers. This allowed the plane to keep a small minimum speed and simplify takeoffs and landings. Well, not so much to simplify, but rather to make them not so difficult. To reduce the run after landing, the aircraft was equipped with a brake parachute hidden in the tail from below. The landing gear is tricycle and quite powerful, like that of a bomber. The front leg is two-wheeled, the main gear has four-wheeled bogies going into the fairings in the wing near the center section. The air intakes are semicircular, raised up. They have dynamic airflow control cones and long channels stretching to the engines in the tail. Meanwhile, the fuselage takes into account the area rule, so the aircraft has a narrow waist near the center section. The fiery heart of the Tu-128 is a pair of AL-7F2 turbojet engines, a new boosted version of the popular AL-7 engine. Each engine produces a thrust of 72 kilonewtons in non-afterburner mode, and a bit more than 99 kilonewtons in afterburner. Interestingly, the thrust of a pair of these was enough to, under certain conditions, keep the aircraft at supersonic speed without the afterburner. And the afterburner allowed it to accelerate to a maximum of 1042 knots, and up to 899 knots with missiles, Mach 1.5. But the main advantage was the range and duration of the flight. The Tu-128, when patrolling, could fly up to 3 hours and had a range of under 1300 miles. I will note right away that this is not a combat radius, but nevertheless it was much more than that of other interceptor relatives. The practical ceiling reached 15.6 kilometers. The Tu-128 crew consists of 2 people. A pilot and a navigator, located in the cockpits one behind the other with individual lights. Family ties with the Tupolev bombers are evident here. The glazing is very similar to that of the Tu-22, and the filling of the cockpits was made in the same style. The most striking example of this was full-fledged yokes, and not the sticks familiar to fighters and interceptors. The onboard equipment at the time of creation of the Tu-128 was the most advanced, and the dimensions of the aircraft gave the engineers room for imagination. It received the RPS Smerch radar, capable of detecting targets at a distance of 50 kilometers and acquiring them at 40 kilometers. The armament of the Tu-128 is not rich in variety, but for its time it was very serious. The main caliber of the interceptor was the R-4 air-to-air missiles, NATO name AA-5 Ash, in the R-4T versions with infrared homing, and the R-4R with semi-active radar homing. The missiles are quite large, weighing half a ton each, carry a 53-kilogram warhead, and are capable of attacking targets at a distance of up to 16 kilometers using infrared and up to 25 kilometers using radar. The combination of capabilities of the onboard systems and missiles greatly expanded the abilities of the Tu-128, With them, it could attack even supersonic targets, not only in pursuit, but also in a head-on course, at altitudes of up to 21 kilometers, several kilometers above the ceiling of the aircraft itself. With standard equipment, the interceptor received 4 missiles on pylons under the wing, 2 R4T and 2 R4R. The plans were epic. It was assumed that more than 20 regiments would be deployed along the Soviet border, a whole system with hundreds of aircraft. But the Tu-128 was a large, complex and expensive aircraft, and ambitions had to be slightly lowered. Despite the rapid release of the first series, full-fledged deliveries were deployed only by 1966. The release continued until 1971. A total of 198 aircraft were assembled, most of which joined 6 aviation regiments. Mastering the latest interceptor in the air defense forces began in 1964. Training, by the way, was quite difficult. It was not easy to change from familiar fighters to hefty and very specific machines. After much debate, it was nevertheless decided to create a special training aircraft. This is how the Tu-128 UT appeared, with an additional cockpit in the nose, because of which it received the nickname Pelican. The Tu-128 was a demanding machine, but having mastered it, the pilots got their hands on a tool that knew no equal. The concept of using interceptors in conjunction with ground forces has been preserved. Ground-based or air-based location systems detect a target and direct the interceptors, which are then attacking. At the same time, the Tu-128 was much more autonomous than its counterparts. It could conduct long patrols and work independently in regions where the air defense infrastructure was underdeveloped, which solved one of the main problems: covering the north, the largest, almost empty, and difficult to defend border, from where the uninvited guests would most likely have come. The world was lucky. The main characters of World War III did not appear, but games with a probable opponent in the career of the Tu-128 were not uncommon. Bombers did not fly, but there were a great many reconnaissance planes, from simpler devices to very interesting machines, primarily the SR-71. But no clashes. The Blackbirds did not cross the border, and the Fiddlers flew in parallel, both of them keeping an honorable distance. In reality, they had to shoot only at American balloons with reconnaissance equipment. But it was a boring battle. For the United States, these devices were by and large expendable, and for the USSR air defense, well, a heavy long-range supersonic interceptor wasn't really made for balloons. By the end of the 1960s, the bombing strategy had changed. The concept of a low-altitude defense penetration appeared, where air defenses were less effective. The Tupolevs had to answer this challenge. This is how the Tu-128M appeared, with new onboard equipment, radar and missiles capable of attacking targets at altitudes less than a kilometer. Moreover, these were not new serial machines, but a modification that was introduced on already produced aircraft. By the way, there were many ideas for further development of the interceptor, and it was about quite radical change, the replacement of onboard systems, engines and weapons, up to the creation of multifunctional machines and bombers. The brightest were the projects Tu-138, with a serious increase in performance of the interceptor, and the Tu-148, which was by and large a new aircraft with a different airframe, engines and a variable sweep wing. But these projects, like many others, were not implemented. They were difficult and expensive. The Tu-138 potentially did not provide such striking opportunities compared to the 128s, and the Tu-148, for all its coolness, was already rather a multifunctional machine that turned out to be not needed by either the air defense, they needed a pure interceptor, and the Air Force, they already had multifunctional planes. Interestingly, the appearance of the MiG-25 did not at all lead to the end of the Tu-128 career. Despite the fact that the MiG was, of course, a revolutionary machine and received for its time a completely wild performance, in some respects it was inferior to Tupolev, who continued to successfully serve side by side with its formidable brother. But the appearance of the MiG-31 brought this service to an end. The newest aircraft, with all its similarities to the MiG-25, was much more advanced and began to quickly replace its ancestors. However, this replacement was not at all instantaneous, and the Tu-128 continued to fly until the early 1990s. After the end of operations, most of the fleet was waiting for the sad fate of recycling. Some of the aircraft went to storage, and some went to museums. The first prototype was lucky. Not only did it have a rather stormy and dangerous career that it managed to survive, but after completing its service, it went to the Central Air Force Museum. Now it is in Monina. On this, I think, the story can be concluded. The veteran interceptor appeared where it was needed and when it was needed. It completed its task and retired, leaving many memories for everyone who worked with it for several decades. Like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to watch the videos early, see some exclusive behind-the-scenes content, or just support the channel, consider joining our Patreon community. Fast flights and soft landings to you, and may you meet with missiles only at exhibitions.